Welcome to this Gearwig painting tutorial. In this video, we will use some simple blending to create a gradient effect from a lighter highlight color down to the darker base color. Here we have an unfinished Firefly Warjack. I've already hit all the blue areas of the model with a base coat. Now I'd like to put some highlights on the shoulders. I don't want a stark transition from the lightest highlight to the darkest base. I don't want it to look like a solid stripe of a light blue on top of a dark blue. I'd like it to be gradual, to go from dark slowly up to the lightest blue. So for this, I'm going to use blending. When we blend a highlight effect in, we mix the lighter blue highlight with the darker blue base while they're both still wet on the model to get a gradual transition from one to the other. The effect will take some time to apply, so we'll need to set up a wet palette, a special palette that will keep our paints from drying while we're working. We can see the finished effect on the hunter here to the left. Notice he's got a sort of light blue highlight in the center of his middle shoulder pad, and then it gets sort of cloudy as it gradually transitions down into the darker blue. It's a very subtle effect, but it makes the blue armor feel sort of alive. It's not so flat. We won't need much in the way of materials. First, let's gather what we need for our wet palette. We'll need a disposable plate or some other similar container. You'll need paper towels. It is not mandatory that the paper towels have pairs on them. You'll need parchment paper, which can be found in any grocery store. You'll need some acrylic paint, the same paint you normally use to paint models. I'm using Citadel today. I have Altdorf Guard Blue for the base coat. I'm using some Lawthorn Blue for the light highlight. And I may blend in some bright white on some of the edges, so I have some white scar handy. You'll need some retarder for acrylic paint. This can be found in any arts and crafts store. It comes out as sort of a soft gel. It mixes with the paint and thins it, and also keeps it wet on the model for much longer than a normal thinning agent like water. This particular retarding agent I'm using is sort of a cheapo generic one. There are other more expensive ones to be found on the internet that may provide a smoother blend. Sometimes I struggle with this one. The blends I make might not be perfectly even, but it gets the job done for the most part. I've only ever used Citadel paints for these blends. I've been told that other paints like Vallejo paints are actually better for it, but I haven't tried that personally. The wet palette is very easy to set up. We dampen our paper towel and throw it in the plastic plate. We cut out a square of parchment paper and then place it on the top and press it down. Parchment paper is porous, unlike, say, wax paper. Some of the water from the paper towel will soak through and keep our paints from drying out, but not so much water that our paints become too thin. Start with the base coat, the Altdorf Guard Blue. And we'll throw down a few blobs of it. Instead of using water to thin the paint like we normally would, we're going to use the retarding agent to thin the paint. When you're on a wet palette, a little bit of the water will come through and thin it a little more than normal anyway. So we shouldn't have to use water in the normal sense. We'll dab on some retarder. I found that 2 parts retarder to 3 parts paint works about well, but it's the kind of thing you have to experiment with from pigment to pigment. Again, it comes out in a little soft gel and mixes in nicely with the paint, thinning it to about the consistency you'd normally want to paint with. And we'll do the same with our light blue highlight. We'll finish with a dab of white, and that'll be our palette. With the paper towel soaking through and the retarder mixed in with the paint, these paint blobs here will stay wet for hours. I've left them overnight and woken up with them still wet, so as long as you feel like painting, this palette will be here and ready to go. We'll start painting the Jack's left shoulder. We'll take the base coat blue and paint a ring around the outside where we expect the color to be darkest. You can imagine a light source hitting the shoulder at the upper part of the rounded area, and that's where we want our paint to be lighter, blending down to dark on the edges. We'll take the highlight blue and paint a splotch on the top area. At this point, there's a solid border between the two blues. There's a definite stripe from light to dark. We then clean off our brush, leave it a little damp, and lightly fudge the border between the two blues. Very carefully take the brush back and forth in an effort to blend it. It can easily get pushed around a little bit and messed up, and a lot of the time the base coat at the bottom will show through the top, so you'll see splotchy areas where you want it to be light blue. And when this happens, you just need to apply some more. It takes several layers to get it right, and a lot of fudging. It took me a really long time to be at all good at this, but once I got the hang of it, it was pretty easy. It's just time consuming. I use a fine detail brush, it's just easier that way. Sometimes if I'm struggling with an area, I'll just let it dry and go over it after that. If there's a lighter coat on top, the base coat doesn't show through as much, and you can actually get an easier blend. So sometimes it's easier just to move on to the other shoulder or whatever, and then come back to that one and fix it up a little bit. The more layers you put on, the better it'll look, and the more successful you'll be. It's just a matter of how much time you want to spend fudging it. Sometimes you just say, good enough. But to really make it perfect, you can just go over it again and again and again. Typically when it dries, it doesn't look so stark. So if, while you're painting it, the effect looks subtle, then when it dries, it might not be noticeable at all. Often I've done a blend with a dark brown and a light brown that I think looks good while I'm painting it, but when they're dried, they both look so similar that it's like nothing happened. It's better generally to go pretty extreme, like a really dark and a really light blue, or brown, or whatever color, and blend from there, confident that when it dries, it'll come down a little bit and be more subtle. A thin wash can help as well. When I use blends on my Gatormen, I try to make their rounded areas, like their shoulders and their snouts, highlighted, and I try to blend it into their normal base color. And afterward, I put a thin wash over to get inside the cracks on their scales, to add darker regions there, and that has the dual effect of also toning down the blend, which is nice. Here I work on one of his gauntlets here, and I try to get a blend on the upper part. Try to put white on the very tips there. It doesn't take as at first, the white's very thin, and a lot of the base coat comes through and makes sort of splotchy. I'll need to apply it a couple more times to really get the white to stay on there. But I like to put a little white line on the edge of a lit area where I'm blending up to a lighter highlight, and then blend the white down into the highlight. It adds sort of like a glint to an edge of metal. It doesn't really work so much on big smooth areas, I've found, but on a metal edge it looks really cool. We've got the beginnings of a pretty good blend there. I'd probably go over the whole model again one more time just to smooth out some splotchy areas or patch up some uneven spots, but it already looks a lot better than it did. Let's end with a quick look at some finished models. Here's an ironclad where I use the same effect. You can see where there are spaces in between his plates. I put a little white glint there. Try to make it shine a little bit. That was the first blend I ever did. It came out really well. I use blending on cloaks a lot. Here I blended in a couple light green highlights onto iris. Blending works great for muscles. This Gearwig has a whole bunch of awesome details here, so I was able to blend some dark brown in there. It looks great. In this satyr, similarly, I gave him like a white deer butt that I blended into his typical flesh color. Use that on his face too a little bit, white into yellow. Looked alright. And there's Laris, similarly going for some darker gray into lighter gray. So all like circle beast stuff, anything with muscles is a great target for blends. Thank you for watching. You can find more Warmachine stuff, battle reports, articles, guides, and more at Gearwig.com. You can email me at boss@gearwig.com or check out our Facebook or Twitter page. You can help out the site by subscribing to this YouTube channel. And thanks.